For a long time, I believed the same thing most people believe. I believed that if I worked hard enough, money would eventually catch up. That if I stayed disciplined, patient, and consistent, things would sort themselves out. That struggle was simply the price of progress. So I did what I was taught to do. I worked harder. I stayed busy. I filled my days with effort and my mind with responsibility. And from the outside, it looked like I was doing everything right. But inside, something always felt slightly off. No matter how much I worked, money never felt settled. No matter how much progress I made, there was always a quiet tension underneath it all. A sense that I was constantly pushing, but never quite arriving. At some point, I realized something uncomfortable. The problem wasn't that I was lazy. It wasn't that I lacked discipline, and it definitely wasn't that I didn't want it badly enough. The problem was that I was chasing money, and money, I learned, does not respond well to being chased. Most people are never told this. They're taught that money is a reward, a prize you earn through effort, sacrifice, and persistence. Something that shows up once you've proven yourself worthy. But that explanation never fully matched reality, because we all know people who work endlessly and still struggle. And we all know people who seem to attract opportunities with far less effort. For a long time, I tried to explain that gap with luck, timing, or unfair advantages. But the longer I observed, the harder it became to ignore a different possibility. What if money wasn't responding to effort at all? What if it was responding to something deeper? That question stayed with me, and it quietly changed the way I looked at everything. I began to notice patterns. There were moments in my life when money flowed more easily. Not when I was pushing harder, but when I was clearer. When my decisions were simpler. When my mind felt ordered rather than frantic. And there were other moments, very busy moments, when nothing seemed to move, no matter how much energy I poured in. That contrast couldn't be explained by effort alone. Slowly, I started to understand something most people never stop to examine. Money is not controlled the way we think it is. You can't force it, you can't intimidate it, you can't wrestle it into submission with long hours and clenched teeth. Money behaves more like a current than a prize. It moves, it flows, and it responds to conditions. The moment I stopped asking, how do I make more money? And started asking, what does money actually respond to? Everything shifted. Not overnight, not magically, but fundamentally. I stopped seeing money as something outside of me that needed to be chased, and I began seeing it as something that reacted to alignment, clarity, and understanding. That realization was deeply uncomfortable at first, because it meant letting go of a familiar identity. The identity of someone who believes that exhaustion is proof of progress. It meant admitting that effort alone was not the lever I thought it was. And it meant taking responsibility not just for my actions, but for my internal state. But once that understanding settled in, something else happened. The pressure eased. I stopped forcing decisions that didn't feel coherent. I stopped saying yes to paths that required constant resistance. I stopped measuring progress purely in terms of activity. And in that space, something unexpected emerged. Money began to feel less hostile, less distant, less like something I had to chase down and convince. Not because I had learned a trick, not because I discovered a shortcut, but because I was finally operating from a different level of understanding. Most people never reach this point. They spend their lives oscillating between hope and exhaustion, between motivation and burnout, between short bursts of progress and long stretches of frustration. And they assume that this cycle is normal. It isn't. It's simply the result of trying to solve a systemic problem with effort alone. Money does not respond to force. It responds to coherence. When your thinking is fragmented, money reflects that fragmentation. When your decisions are reactive, money behaves unpredictably. When your internal world is disordered, Your financial world mirrors it. This is not a moral judgment. It's not a criticism. It's a law. And like all laws, it operates whether you understand it or not. This audiobook is not about tactics. It's not about hustling harder or finding the next opportunity. It's about understanding the invisible mechanics behind how money actually moves. Because once that understanding is in place, something remarkable happens. Money no longer feels like an opponent. It no longer feels distant or arbitrary, and it no longer requires constant pursuit. When you understand money, it has no choice but to work for you. Not because you demand it to, but because you've finally learned how it responds. And that is where everything truly begins. Chapter 1. The River of Money. Money behaves less like an object and more like a force. You can't push it forward, you can't pull it closer, and you can't demand that it obey you simply because you're trying harder. Money moves. It flows according to conditions that exist long before effort enters the picture. Imagine standing beside a wide river. The water doesn't rush because you want it to. It doesn't slow down because you're tired. It moves at its own pace, following a path shaped by terrain, gravity, and time. Money works the same way. You don't advance by fighting the current. You advance by understanding where the current already flows. When someone struggles financially for years, it's rarely because they lack discipline or desire. More often, they are positioned against the flow without realizing it. They work, they save, they persist. Yet everything feels heavy. The movement is slow, the resistance is constant. Progress requires force. That sensation is not failure, it is feedback. A river does not punish the swimmer who fights it. It simply keeps moving in its own direction. There is a subtle but critical distinction here. Effort determines how tired you become. Position determines how far you go. This is why two people can exert similar energy and experience completely different financial outcomes. One is expending strength just to stay afloat. The other is being carried forward, not because they are smarter, not because they are luckier, but because they are standing in a different place relative to the current. Money does not reward struggle. It responds to alignment. When your actions are placed where value already moves, money accelerates naturally. When your actions oppose that movement, money resists, quietly, consistently, without explanation. This resistance often gets misunderstood. People assume they need more willpower, more motivation, more hours. So they double down, they grip tighter, they push harder, and the river continues to flow exactly as it always has. Understanding money begins with recognizing this pattern. It is not about learning how to overpower the current. It is about learning how to read it. Rivers follow predictable paths. They deepen where flow is steady. They widen where obstacles are minimal. They carve channels over time, not through force, but through persistence in the same direction. Money follows similar channels: value creation, problem solving, leverage, compounding. These are not strategies. They are the terrain through which money naturally moves. When you place your energy in these channels, progress feels lighter. Momentum builds without constant pressure. Movement becomes sustainable. This is why money often appears to find certain people. In reality, they are simply positioned where money already flows. They are not swimming harder. They are standing differently. Once you see money as a river, a critical shift occurs. You stop asking how to force results. You start asking where movement already exists. You become less obsessed with effort and more attentive to placement. And that awareness changes everything. Because when you stand in the current instead of against it, money no longer feels like something you must chase. It begins to carry you forward, quietly, naturally, relentlessly. And this understanding sets the foundation for everything that follows. Chapter 2. Why hard work is not the problem. Hard work has never been the enemy. Effort itself is not a mistake. Discipline is not misguided. Persistence is not the reason people struggle financially. The problem begins when effort is treated as the primary mechanism through which money is expected to arrive. Hard work is often framed as a universal solution. If something isn't working, the answer is assumed to be more hours, more pressure, more sacrifice. And for a while, this belief feels reasonable because effort does produce movement. But movement is not the same as progress. You can move endlessly in the wrong direction and still end up exactly where you started, only more exhausted. This is where the confusion takes root. People who work hard and remain stuck don't feel unlucky. They feel betrayed. They did what they were told. They followed the rules as they understood them, and yet the outcome never fully materialized. That disconnect creates frustration, and frustration often leads to one of two reactions. Some people push even harder, convinced that exhaustion is proof of commitment. Others quietly disengage, assuming the system is rigged or success is reserved for someone else. Both responses miss the same underlying truth. Effort is not what money responds to. Effort is internal. Money is external. Between the two lies a translation layer most people never learn to recognize. Hard work amplifies whatever direction you're already facing. If you're aligned with value, leverage, and systems, effort compounds results. If you're misaligned, effort only accelerates depletion. This is why two people can work with equal intensity and experience vastly different outcomes. One person's effort builds momentum. The other person's effort burns fuel. Not because one is smarter or more deserving, but because effort without understanding magnifies inefficiency. Money doesn't evaluate how tired you are. It doesn't acknowledge sacrifice. It doesn't keep score of long hours or missed weekends. It simply reacts to structure. When effort is applied inside a coherent structure, money flows. When effort exists without structure, money dissipates. This is uncomfortable to accept because it challenges a deeply held belief that struggle itself has value. Struggle feels noble. It feels earned. It feels fair. But money is indifferent to fairness. It doesn't reward who try the hardest. It responds to who is positioned correctly. This is not a dismissal of effort. It's a reframing of its role. Effort is a multiplier, not a foundation. Used correctly, it accelerates progress. Used blindly, it deepens stagnation. The exhaustion so many people experience isn't a sign that they are close to success. It's a signal that effort is being spent compensating for a lack of understanding. Once this becomes clear, something subtle changes. You stop asking how to work harder. You start asking where your effort is being applied. And that shift creates space for a different kind of progress, one that doesn't demand constant resistance. This chapter isn't an argument against hard work. It's an invitation to stop mistaking effort for alignment. Because money has never been impressed by how much you push. It responds to how well you understand the system you're operating within. And that understanding is what allows effort to finally do what it was always meant to do. Move you forward instead of wearing you down. Chapter 3. The Invisible Law of Money. Money operates according to a law most people never see, not because it is hidden, but because it doesn't announce itself. It works quietly, consistently, and without emotion. Money does not respond to intention. It does not respond to effort, and it does not respond to need. It responds to understanding. This is difficult to accept at first because understanding feels passive compared to action. Effort feels active. Effort feels earned. But money is not persuaded by activity. It is guided by structure. Think of gravity. You don't negotiate with it. You don't convince it you deserve an exception. You don't override it by trying harder. You either move in accordance with it or you experience resistance. Money works the same way. You can spend years doing everything right and still feel blocked. Not because you are missing a tactic, but because you are operating against an unseen rule. That rule is simple. Money flows toward clarity, coherence, and value. When these elements are present, movement happens naturally. When they are absent, effort fills the gap and drains you in the process. This is why money often appears unpredictable. From the outside, it looks random. From the inside, it is remarkably consistent. People who understand this law stop trying to force outcomes. They stop treating money like a stubborn object that must be pushed into place. Instead, they focus on alignment. They simplify decisions. They remove friction. They reduce contradiction between what they do and what actually creates value. And money responds. Not instantly, not dramatically, but reliably. The law does not care about timing. It cares about structure. When your financial life is built on scattered actions and reactive choices, money reflects that disorder. When it is built on clear principles and consistent placement of energy, money reflects stability. This is not motivational language. It is mechanical. Money behaves according to conditions. It moves where it can move easily. It accumulates where it is allowed to stay. It grows where it is given time and coherence. Once this becomes clear, a subtle shift occurs. You stop asking why money feels distant. You start examining the invisible rules shaping its movement. And when those rules are understood, money no longer feels arbitrary. It becomes predictable. Not because you control it, but because you finally understand what it responds to. This is the law most people never learn, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because from that point on, every financial outcome, good or bad, begins to make sense. Chapter 4. You have experienced this before. There have been moments in your life when money moved differently. Not because you planned better, not because you worked longer hours, but because something inside you was settled. You may not have noticed it at the time, but if you look closely, the pattern is there. A period when decisions felt cleaner, when you weren't forcing outcomes, when you weren't constantly second-guessing yourself. And during those moments, things seemed to line up. Opportunities appeared without being hunted. Conversations led somewhere useful. Money arrived without the familiar tension attached to it. Then, just as quietly, the state faded. The pressure returned. The urgency came back, and money once again felt distant, resistant, unpredictable. Most people dismiss these moments as coincidence. They call it luck, good timing, a temporary break. But coincidence doesn't repeat itself with such precision. What you experienced wasn't randomness. It was alignment. When your internal state is ordered, your external results reflect that order. When your thinking is clear, your decisions compound instead of cancel each other out. When your energy isn't fragmented, money has a place to land. This is why money often arrives during periods when you're not obsessing over it. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped interfering. Interference is subtle. It shows up as overthinking, as reacting instead of responding, as saying yes to things that feel slightly wrong because you're afraid to miss out. Each small contradiction creates friction, and friction slows flow. Think back to a time when you felt financially in sync. You probably weren't chasing 10 different directions. You weren't constantly comparing yourself to others. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were simply doing what made sense, quietly, consistently, without internal resistance. That state doesn't feel dramatic. It feels calm. And calm is often mistaken for inactivity. But calm is not passive. Calm is coherent. When your internal world is coherent, money responds with fewer obstacles. Not because money has emotions, but because coherence removes noise from your decisions. Noise creates waste. Waste creates friction. Friction slows everything down. This is why effort alone doesn't explain financial outcomes. Two people can exert similar effort, possess similar skills, and live very different financial lives. One is constantly correcting course. The other is compounding quietly. One is busy reacting. The other is steadily building. The difference isn't motivation, it's internal order. Money reflects the structure behind your choices. When that structure is scattered, results are scattered. When it is stable, results stabilize. This isn't something you can fake. You can't perform alignment. You can't simulate coherence. It emerges when you stop fighting yourself, when your actions are no longer driven by fear of falling behind, when your decisions aren't shaped by what others are doing, when you're no longer trying to extract results from every move. That is when money begins to behave differently. Not faster, not louder, but more reliably. This reliability is often misinterpreted. People assume that once you figure it out, money becomes effortless, that it flows freely without resistance. That isn't true. What changes isn't the absence of effort, it's the absence of internal conflict. Effort applied without conflict compounds. Effort applied with conflict dissipates. This is why understanding matters more than intensity. Understanding aligns effort with structure. Intensity amplifies whatever structure already exists. If the structure is sound, intensity accelerates progress. If the structure is unstable, intensity accelerates collapse. You've seen this before, even if you didn't have language for it. You've watched people burn out after a period of rapid growth. You've watched others move steadily forward without dramatic swings. The difference wasn't ambition, it was coherence. Money doesn't rush toward chaos, it avoids it. Chaos introduces unpredictability, and unpredictability increases risk. Money moves where risk is contained, not where effort is loud. This is why certain environments attract capital effortlessly. Clear systems, consistent rules, predictable behavior. Money flows there because it can stay. The same principle applies internally. When your thinking is erratic, money reflects that erratic pattern. When your values are unclear, money mirrors that uncertainty. When your actions contradict each other, money resists settling. Understanding money begins with recognizing this mirror, not as judgment, but as feedback. Your financial outcomes are not personal evaluations. They are structural responses. They show you how ordered or disordered your internal system currently is. Once you see money this way, blame becomes irrelevant. You stop blaming yourself. You stop blaming the economy. You stop blaming circumstances. Instead, you observe. You notice where friction appears. You notice where effort feels heavy. You notice where progress requires force. And you ask a different kind of question. Not, how do I push harder? But, what is misaligned here? This question changes everything, because alignment doesn't require aggression. It requires honesty. Honesty about what you're building, honesty about why you're doing it, honesty about where your energy actually belongs. When those answers become clear, money responds accordingly, not as a reward, not as validation, but as a natural consequence of coherence. You've already experienced this. The calm moments, the periods of quiet momentum, the stretches where money felt less adversarial. They weren't accidents. They were glimpses of how money behaves when understanding is present. This chapter isn't meant to convince you of something new. It's meant to remind you of something you already know, but never learned to trust. Because once you recognize the pattern, you begin to realize something important. Money has always been responding to you, not to how hard you push, but to how clearly you're aligned. And that realization prepares you for the next shift, the one where understanding stops being occasional and starts becoming permanent. Chapter 5. Naming the right state. Understanding deepens the moment something is given a name. Before that, it exists only as a feeling, vague, fleeting, easy to dismiss. Once named, it becomes visible. Once visible, it becomes repeatable. The financial state you've brushed against before, the one where money felt calmer, less resistant, more cooperative, has a structure. It is not accidental, and it is not rare. It is simply unnamed for most people. This state is often confused with confidence. Sometimes it's mistaken for motivation. Other times it's described as being in the zone, but those descriptions are incomplete. The more accurate word is coherence. Coherence is what happens when your thinking, your decisions, and your actions stop contradicting each other. You're no longer pulled in multiple directions at once. You're no longer reacting emotionally while pretending to be strategic. You're no longer saying yes to things your intuition quietly resists. Everything begins to line up. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to create stability. Money responds strongly to this state, not because it senses emotion, but because coherence removes inefficiency. Inefficiency is expensive. It shows up as wasted effort, as constant course correction, as financial decisions that undo each other over time. When coherence is absent, money leaks. When coherence is present, money stays. This is why some people seem to make fewer moves but progress further. They aren't faster, they're cleaner. Their decisions don't fight each other. Their priorities are clear. Their financial life isn't pulled apart by competing motives. They don't build in 10 directions at once. They build in one direction long enough for momentum to take hold. That state, coherence, has close relatives. Clarity, alignment, internal order. Different words point to the same condition, a reduction of internal noise. Noise is the hidden enemy of financial growth. Noise looks like overconsumption of information, like reacting to every new opportunity, like constantly switching strategies out of fear of missing out. Noise creates motion without direction, and motion without direction is exhausting. When noise quiets, a different quality emerges. Decisions feel simpler. Trade-offs become obvious. You stop needing external validation to move forward. This is when money begins to behave differently, not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily. Steadiness is rarely celebrated, yet it is the hallmark of durable wealth. Money prefers environments it can predict. Predictability reduces risk. Reduced risk attracts capital. Capital accumulates where it feels safe to remain. This applies externally and internally. When your internal world is volatile, money reflects that volatility. When your internal world stabilizes, money mirrors that stability. This is not about suppressing emotion, it's about resolving contradiction. You can feel uncertainty and still be coherent. You can feel fear and still act in alignment. Coherence doesn't demand emotional perfection. It demands structural honesty. Are your goals aligned with your actions? Are your actions aligned with your values? Are your values aligned with how you define enough? Most people never slow down long enough to ask these questions. They assume more effort will compensate for misalignment. It won't. Effort amplifies whatever structure already exists. When the structure is fragmented, effort accelerates fragmentation. When the structure is coherent, effort compounds progress. This is why naming the state matters. Once you recognize coherence, you can notice when it's absent. You can feel when decisions begin to pull against each other. You can detect when noise starts creeping back in, and that awareness becomes a form of control, not over money, but over conditions. You stop trying to force outcomes. You start managing alignment. This shift changes how you measure progress. Instead of asking whether you're doing enough, you ask whether what you're doing fits. Instead of chasing growth, you focus on reducing contradiction. Instead of adding more strategies, you simplify. Simplicity is not minimalism, it's precision. It's knowing what matters and letting everything else go. Money moves more freely in simple systems. Complexity increases friction. Friction slows flow. This is why financial systems that last are rarely complicated. They are clear, they are consistent, they are boring to outsiders, and they work. The same principle applies to the individual. When your financial life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer, money responds. It becomes easier to predict outcomes, easier to absorb setbacks, easier to stay the course when emotion fluctuates. This is not because you've mastered money. It's because you've mastered coherence. Once this state is named, it becomes something you can return to, not through force, not through motivation, but through awareness. You notice when you're scattered. You notice when urgency is driving decisions. You notice when fear is shaping priorities. And instead of pushing harder, you pause. That pause is powerful. It interrupts the cycle of reaction. It creates space for alignment to re-emerge. And when alignment returns, money follows. Quietly, consistently. This chapter isn't offering a technique. It's offering a language, a way to recognize the state money responds to. Because once you can name coherence, you stop confusing movement with progress and effort with effectiveness. You begin to see money for what it has always been. A mirror, reflecting not how hard you push, but how well your inner system is ordered. And with that recognition, you're ready for the next shift. The one that separates those who try to manage money from those who understand how to let it work. Chapter 6. 2 types of people. At some point, a quiet divide begins to form, not between rich and poor, not between educated and uneducated, but between 2 fundamentally different ways of relating to money. The first type tries to control money. They monitor it constantly. They track every movement. They worry about losing it before they've even had a chance to keep it. Their attention is always slightly tense. Money, to them, feels fragile. Something that must be guarded, protected, and held tightly. This mindset doesn't come from greed. It comes from uncertainty. When you don't fully understand how something works, your instinct is to control it. You grip tighter because letting go feels dangerous. So this type of person builds their financial life around defense. They avoid mistakes. They minimize risk. They hesitate before committing. On the surface, this looks responsible. But underneath, it creates a subtle problem. Control consumes energy. The more tightly you try to manage every outcome, the less capacity you have to see the bigger picture. The more you focus on preventing loss, the harder it becomes to allow growth. Money senses this environment indirectly, not emotionally, but structurally. An overly controlled system becomes rigid. Rigid systems don't adapt well, and systems that don't adapt struggle to compound. The second type relates to money very differently. They don't try to control it in the same way. They don't obsess over every fluctuation. They don't react to every signal. Instead, they focus on understanding how value is created, understanding where leverage exists, understanding which decisions matter and which ones don't. This doesn't make them careless. It makes them selective. They don't waste attention on noise. They don't confuse activity with progress. They don't treat every opportunity as urgent. They design their financial life rather than micromanage it. The difference between these 2 types isn't visible at first. Both may work hard. Both may appear disciplined. Both may experience setbacks. But over time, the gap widens. The controller becomes exhausted. They're constantly adjusting, correcting, defending. Their financial life feels like something that needs constant supervision. Any disruption feels threatening. Any uncertainty feels personal. The understander becomes steadier. They still face challenges, but those challenges don't destabilize them. They've built structures that absorb volatility rather than amplify it. Where the first type feels pressure, the second feels patience. This distinction explains something many people struggle to articulate. Why some individuals seem calm around money even when circumstances change. Why others feel anxious even when things are objectively fine. It isn't about how much they have. It's about how they relate to what they have. Trying to control money creates a feedback loop. Anxiety leads to tighter control. Tighter control reduces flexibility. Reduced flexibility increases risk. Understanding breaks that loop. Understanding replaces anxiety with clarity. Clarity allows for better positioning. Positioning allows money to move without constant interference. This doesn't mean the second type never intervenes. They do, but strategically. They act where structure matters. They ignore where noise dominates. They understand that not every fluctuation requires a response. Not every dip needs explanation. Not every opportunity deserves attention. This restraint is often mistaken for passivity. It isn't. It's discipline applied at the right level. The first type applies discipline to control outcomes. The second applies discipline to maintain alignment, and alignment changes everything. When alignment is present, decisions reinforce each other instead of canceling out. When alignment is absent, even good decisions feel heavy. This is why the second type often appears to wait more. They wait for clarity. They wait for structure. They wait until their actions feel coherent. This waiting isn't hesitation. It's precision. They know that poorly placed action is more costly than delayed action. The first type struggles with this. Waiting feels like losing ground. Inaction feels irresponsible. Silence feels dangerous. So they act, often prematurely. They adjust constantly, hoping control will compensate for uncertainty. But control never creates understanding. It only masks its absence. The shift from the first type to the second doesn't happen all at once. It begins with a subtle change in focus. Less attention on outcomes, more attention on conditions, less obsession with short-term results. More concern for long-term coherence. You stop asking whether something will work immediately. You start asking whether it fits the system you're building. This is the moment money begins to feel less volatile. Not because circumstances magically improve, but because your relationship to fluctuation changes. You no longer interpret every movement as a signal. You no longer internalize every outcome. You see patterns instead of events. And patterns are predictable. The first type lives event to event. The second lives pattern to pattern. Events create stress. Patterns create understanding. Over time, this difference compounds. The controller's energy is spent maintaining balance. The understander's energy is spent creating momentum. One is constantly stabilizing. The other is steadily progressing. This is not a moral distinction. Both types are trying to do the same thing, create security. They simply choose different paths. One path relies on force, the other relies on structure, and money responds very differently to each. Money resists force. It flows through structure. This chapter isn't about choosing sides, it's about recognizing where you currently stand. Because once you see the distinction clearly, a new option appears. You don't have to control money to feel safe. You don't have to monitor every detail to feel responsible. You can build systems that reduce the need for control. You can shift from managing outcomes to managing conditions. And when that shift takes place, money begins to behave less like something you must hold together and more like something that works alongside you, not because you demand it, but because you finally understand the role you're meant to play. That understanding sets the stage for the next chapter, the one where chasing finally gives way to positioning, and effort is replaced by something far more powerful. Chapter 7. When you stop chasing. There is a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when chasing begins to lose its grip. Not because you've given up, not because you've lowered your standards, but because something finally clicks. You realize that chasing has a cost, not just in energy, but in clarity. Chasing keeps your attention locked on outcomes. It pulls your focus forward, away from the present conditions shaping those outcomes. And over time, that distance creates distortion. When you chase money, every decision carries urgency. Every opportunity feels time-sensitive. Every pause feels like a mistake. Urgency compresses perspective. It makes short-term movement feel more important than long-term direction. It encourages action before understanding has time to settle. And that is how misalignment quietly enters. Most people don't notice when this happens. They simply feel a constant pressure to move, to respond, to do something, anything that feels like progress. But progress driven by urgency rarely lasts. Because urgency isn't aligned with structure. It's aligned with fear. Fear of missing out. Fear of falling behind. Fear of standing still while others appear to move forward. When fear drives action, decisions become reactive. Reactive decisions rarely compound. This is why chasing never produces stability. It produces bursts. Short periods of movement followed by long stretches of correction. Momentum that fades as quickly as it appears. Energy spent regaining balance instead of building forward. The moment you stop chasing, something unexpected happens. The noise quiets. You begin to notice how much of your effort was spent responding rather than choosing. How many decisions were shaped by comparison instead of clarity. How often speed replaced precision. Stopping the chase doesn't mean stopping action. It means changing what action is responding to. Instead of reacting to external signals, you begin responding to internal alignment. Instead of asking what will produce the fastest result, you ask what fits the system you're building. This shift feels uncomfortable at first. Without urgency, there's space, and space can feel like uncertainty. But space is also where understanding grows. In that space, patterns become visible. You start to see which efforts consistently produce value and which ones simply create motion. You notice where friction appears and where things move easily. You recognize which paths require constant force and which ones sustain themselves. These observations are impossible when you're chasing. Chasing narrows focus. Stopping expands it. This is why money often begins to behave differently when the chase ends. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly. Decisions feel less rushed. Commitments feel more deliberate. You become willing to say no without anxiety, and saying no is a turning point. When you stop chasing, you stop needing every opportunity to work. You stop needing every move to pay off. You stop placing pressure on outcomes to justify your effort. Pressure distorts judgment. Without it, clarity returns. Clarity doesn't guarantee success, but it dramatically improves positioning. Positioning determines which outcomes are even possible. When you're positioned correctly, effort compounds. When you're positioned poorly, effort compensates. The chase thrives on compensation. Understanding thrives on compounding. This is why people who stop chasing often appear slower at first. They take fewer actions. They move with more hesitation. They wait longer before committing. To an outside observer, it can look like hesitation. It isn't. It's calibration. They are aligning their actions with structure rather than emotion. They are choosing placement over speed. And placement has leverage. A single well-placed decision can outweigh months of frantic activity. A clear no can preserve years of momentum. Chasing rarely allows for this discernment. It treats all movement as progress. It values activity over direction. When the chase ends, discernment begins. You start to notice that money doesn't require persuasion. It requires compatibility. Money moves toward environments where it can function efficiently, where decisions are consistent, where systems don't contradict themselves. By stopping the chase, you reduce contradiction. You stop switching strategies midstream. You stop layering complexity on top of confusion. You stop forcing timelines that don't fit the structure. And money responds. Not because you're trying to attract it, but because you've removed resistance. Resistance often masquerades as effort, pushing through fatigue, powering past doubt, ignoring signals that something isn't aligned. These behaviors are praised in many areas of life, but with money, they often backfire. Money doesn't reward endurance in misalignment. It rewards patience in coherence. When you stop chasing, patience becomes possible. Patience isn't waiting passively, it's holding position deliberately. It's allowing time to do what force cannot. Time reveals whether a structure works. Time exposes weaknesses. Time compounds small advantages into meaningful outcomes. Chasing tries to replace time with intensity. It can't. Intensity burns out. Time compounds. The moment you understand this, your relationship with money shifts. You stop seeing it as something to be caught. You start seeing it as something that flows through systems you design. This perspective reduces anxiety, not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because your actions are no longer desperate. Desperation is expensive. It leads to poor trade-offs. It encourages risk disguised as opportunity. It makes you confuse movement with meaning. Stopping the chase removes desperation from the equation. What remains is intention. Intention clarifies direction. Direction clarifies structure. Structure invites money. This is why stopping the chase often feels like relief. Not relief from responsibility, but relief from pressure. You're no longer trying to prove something. You're no longer measuring worth by speed. You're no longer asking money to validate your effort. You're simply placing yourself where value can grow. And growth, when it's real, doesn't rush. It builds quietly. It stabilizes before it expands. It moves forward without needing constant correction. This chapter marks a turning point. From chasing to positioning. From urgency to alignment. From force to understanding. Once this shift takes hold, effort doesn't disappear. It changes character. It becomes focused. It becomes strategic. It becomes sustainable. And money, freed from pressure, begins to move in ways that feel less adversarial and more cooperative. Not because you've mastered money, but because you've stopped chasing what was never meant to run away from you in the first place. What comes next is not about doing more. It's about learning how to stay in the right place long enough for compounding to do its work. And that is where understanding becomes something deeper than insight. It becomes a way of operating, one that money has no choice but to respond to. Chapter 8. The Seed. Everything that grows follows the same pattern. It begins quietly, invisible at first, easily dismissed. A seed does not announce itself. It does not prove its potential. It does not rush to justify its existence. It simply responds to conditions. Placed in the wrong environment, the seed fails. Not because it lacks potential, but because the conditions are hostile. Placed in the right environment, the seed grows. Not because it tries harder, but because growth becomes inevitable. Money behaves in the same way. Most people misunderstand this because they focus on outcomes instead of environments. They obsess over results. They track progress impatiently. They dig up their efforts repeatedly to see if anything is happening. And every time they do, they interrupt the process they claim to want. Imagine planting a seed and checking it every day. You pull it out of the soil to see if it's growing. You expose it to light before it's ready. You disturb the roots before they've had time to anchor. From the outside, it looks like care. In reality, it guarantees failure. Growth does not tolerate interference. Money does not tolerate it either. When you constantly monitor outcomes, you destabilize the conditions required for compounding. When you demand immediate feedback, you introduce pressure. When you rush timelines, you weaken foundations. This is why patience is so often misunderstood. Patience is not waiting idly. It is maintaining the right conditions without disruption. The seed doesn't grow because it's watched. It grows because it's left alone long enough to do what seeds do. Money compounds under the same principle. It requires consistency, time, and an environment free from constant interference. Most people never allow this environment to exist. They change direction too quickly. They abandon structures before they've had time to stabilize. They mistake early stillness for failure. Stillness is not failure. Stillness is preparation. Under the surface, roots are forming. Connections are being established. Systems are quietly organizing themselves. But because nothing visible is happening yet, doubt creeps in. Doubt leads to action. Action leads to disruption. Disruption resets the process, and the cycle begins again. This is why many people feel like they are always starting over financially. Not because they lack discipline, but because they never stay in one place long enough for compounding to begin. Compounding is fragile at the start. It requires trust before it produces evidence. It requires restraint before it delivers momentum. This is deeply uncomfortable in a culture obsessed with speed. We are trained to expect feedback immediately, to measure progress constantly, to adjust at the first sign of discomfort. But compounding doesn't reward responsiveness, it rewards consistency. The seed does not respond to encouragement, it responds to soil. Soil is not glamorous, it's unseen, it's quiet, it's boring. Yet everything depends on it. In financial terms, soil is structure. It is how decisions are made. It is how priorities are set. It is how energy is allocated over long periods of time. Good soil doesn't guarantee instant growth. It guarantees that growth, once started, has somewhere to go. Poor soil produces nothing, no matter how many seeds are planted. This is why people who constantly chase new opportunities rarely build lasting wealth. They scatter seeds everywhere. They never improve the soil. Understanding money means reversing this behavior. It means choosing one environment and tending it patiently. It means resisting the urge to dig things up prematurely. It means allowing time to do its work without interference. This is not passive behavior. It requires discipline, the discipline to stay consistent when nothing is visible, the discipline to ignore noise when others are reacting, the discipline to trust structure over emotion. Emotion is impatient. Emotion wants reassurance. Emotion wants validation. Emotion wants results now. Money does not respond to emotion. It responds to stability. Stability allows compounding. Compounding creates momentum. Momentum eventually becomes obvious, but only after enough time has passed. This is why people often say wealth looks slow at first, then sudden. The sudden part is an illusion. What appears sudden is simply the moment when growth becomes visible. The seed didn't appear overnight. It was growing the entire time, in silence. This chapter is not about doing less. It's about interfering less. Interference takes many forms. Switching strategies too quickly, constantly comparing your progress to others, making decisions to relieve anxiety rather than improve structure. Each of these behaviors pulls the seed out of the soil. Each one delays compounding. When you understand this, your behavior changes naturally. You stop measuring progress daily. You stop reacting to short-term fluctuations. You stop demanding constant confirmation that you're on the right path. Instead, you evaluate conditions. Is the structure sound? Is the direction coherent? Is the system capable of compounding if left alone? If the answer is yes, patience becomes logical rather than difficult. You're no longer waiting blindly. You're allowing a process to complete. This distinction matters. Waiting without understanding feels like hope. Waiting with understanding feels like inevitability. The seed doesn't hope to grow. It grows when conditions are right. Money doesn't hope to compound. It compounds when structure and time align. This is why true financial confidence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It doesn't seek validation. It simply stays in position. People often mistake this quiet confidence for complacency. It isn't. It is restraint informed by understanding. Restraint is one of the rarest financial skills, the ability to not act, to not interfere, to not react. Most people are trained to equate action with progress, but with compounding systems, action is often the enemy. The most powerful move is often staying still, not forever, but long enough. Long enough for roots to deepen, long enough for systems to stabilize, long enough for momentum to shift from fragile to resilient. This is the difference between growth that collapses under pressure and growth that endures. Enduring wealth is never rushed. It is planted, it is protected, and it is allowed to grow on its own timeline. Understanding this reframes time itself. Time is no longer an obstacle. It becomes an ally. Instead of racing against it, you work with it. Instead of fearing delay, you respect process. This shift removes a tremendous amount of pressure. You stop feeling behind. You stop feeling late. You stop feeling like every moment must be optimized. You begin to see that progress is not linear. It accumulates, quietly, gradually, then unmistakably. This chapter closes the loop back to where we began. Money is not something you chase. It is not something you force. And it is not something you impress with effort. Money is something you plant. You choose the environment, you prepare the soil, you place the seed. And then, this is the part most people skip. You leave it alone long enough to grow. When you understand this, impatience loses its grip. You no longer sabotage compounding by demanding proof too early. You no longer mistake silence for stagnation. You recognize silence as growth happening below the surface, and once you trust that process, something profound happens. You stop interfering, and when interference ends, compounding finally begins. That is why people who understand money appear calm while others rush. Why they seem unbothered by short-term noise. Why they continue building while others restart. They are not lucky. They are simply willing to treat money the way growth actually works. Like a seed, placed correctly, left undisturbed, given time. And once that understanding takes root, money has no choice but to respond. There is another layer to this that rarely gets discussed. The seed does not choose its timeline. No amount of intention can convince it to grow faster than conditions allow. No amount of desire can compress seasons into days. Growth follows rhythm, and one of the quiet sources of financial suffering is the refusal to accept rhythm. People try to outpace time. They try to optimize compounding before it has something to compound. They demand acceleration before stability has been earned. But acceleration without stability always collapses. The seed that grows too quickly without strong roots does not survive its first storm. It looks impressive for a moment, then disappears. This is why early success can be dangerous. It creates the illusion that speed is sustainable. It encourages expansion before systems are ready. It rewards visibility before resilience exists. Understanding money means recognizing that slow beginnings are not a weakness. They are protection. They give structure time to harden. They allow small errors to be absorbed instead of amplified. They teach patience before scale removes the margin for correction. This is also why people who truly understand compounding are rarely loud about it. They don't announce progress early. They don't broadcast plans before they're stable. They don't seek applause during fragile stages. Noise attracts interference. Attention introduces pressure. Pressure invites premature action. The seed does not benefit from attention. It benefits from consistency. In financial terms, consistency is not repeating the same action endlessly. It is repeating the same logic even as circumstances change. Markets shift, opportunities evolve, life introduces variables. Consistency means the underlying principles remain intact. The soil stays fertile. The structure stays coherent. The system remains capable of absorbing time. This is where many people falter. They confuse adaptation with abandonment. They mistake adjustment for starting over. They react to discomfort by uprooting everything. But compounding systems are designed to bend, not reset. They accommodate change without losing direction. They absorb volatility without breaking alignment. That capacity is built slowly. It cannot be rushed. Which brings us to a final, subtle point. Trust. Not blind trust. Not hope. Structural trust. The trust that comes from knowing you are no longer violating basic laws of growth. The trust that emerges when your actions stop contradicting your intentions. The trust that forms when you finally understand why patience is required. Not because someone told you so, but because the logic is undeniable. At that point, waiting no longer feels like restraint. It feels like intelligence. You are not delaying action. You are allowing cause to precede effect. And when cause is stable, effect becomes predictable. This is the quiet confidence people sense but can't quite explain. It doesn't come from certainty about outcomes. It comes from certainty about process. When the process is right, outcomes become a matter of time. And time, when respected, always delivers. This is the final lesson of the seed. You don't grow wealth by forcing results. You grow it by refusing to interfere with what you've already placed correctly. Once you understand that, impatience stops looking productive. Urgency stops feeling necessary, and stillness stops feeling like stagnation. It becomes what it truly is, the space where compounding does its work, silently, relentlessly, on your behalf. And when growth finally becomes visible, it will not feel sudden to you. It will feel overdue, because you will know it was happening all along, just below the surface, in conditions you were finally wise enough to leave undisturbed. Understanding money begins as an insight, a realization that effort alone has limits, that chasing creates resistance, that money responds to structure, alignment, and time, not pressure. But if understanding remains only an idea, nothing truly changes. What matters is when understanding becomes embodied, when it stops being something you think about and starts becoming something you live from. That is the real transition. Earlier, we explored money as a river, something that flows whether you struggle against it or stand within it. We saw how effort without alignment creates exhaustion, how invisible laws operate quietly, without emotion or negotiation, how coherence inside shapes stability outside, how chasing distorts judgment, how compounding demands patience, how growth, like a seed, requires the discipline of non-interference. None of these ideas are complex. They are simply unfamiliar to a culture trained to equate pressure with progress. Most financial advice teaches action. Very little teaches positioning. But positioning is what decides whether effort multiplies or dissipates. When understanding settles in, your relationship with money changes in subtle but profound ways. You stop feeling personally evaluated by outcomes. You stop interpreting fluctuations as verdicts on your worth. You stop confusing activity with advancement. Instead, you begin to see money as feedback, not judgment, not reward. Feedback. Every result points back to structure. Every pattern reveals alignment, or the lack of it. This shift removes a tremendous psychological burden. You're no longer trying to convince money to cooperate. You're simply creating conditions where cooperation is inevitable. And inevitability is a powerful thing. Inevitability doesn't rush. It doesn't argue. It doesn't panic. It unfolds according to law. Once you internalize this, urgency loses its authority over you. You become less reactive, less tempted by noise, less shaken by comparison. Not because you stop caring, but because you stop outsourcing your sense of direction. Direction now comes from coherence rather than consensus. You don't need constant confirmation that you're on the right path. You know what conditions you're maintaining. You know what systems you're building. You know what you're refusing to interfere with. This internal certainty doesn't make life effortless. Challenges still arise. Markets still shift. Mistakes still happen. But your response changes. Instead of scrambling, you recalibrate. Instead of forcing, you reposition. Instead of starting over, you adjust structure. This is what it means to let money work for you. Not that money magically appears, but that your actions stop working against the way money actually moves. Understanding also changes how you measure success. Success stops being about speed. It stops being about visibility. It stops being about comparison. It becomes about durability. Can what you're building survive time? Can it absorb volatility without collapsing? Can it compound quietly without constant supervision? These questions lead to very different choices. You begin to value simplicity over complexity, consistency over intensity, position over pressure. You stop expanding prematurely. You stop chasing validation. You stop reacting to every fluctuation. And in that restraint, strength builds. This is why people who truly understand money often appear unbothered. They are not indifferent, they are insulated. Insulated by structure, by systems that don't require daily intervention, by decisions that reinforce each other rather than conflict. They are not immune to stress, but they are no longer governed by it. Understanding also reframes failure. Failure is no longer an indictment. It's information. It tells you where coherence was missing, where alignment broke down, where structure needs refinement. This perspective encourages responsibility without shame. You don't excuse outcomes, but you don't internalize them either. You observe, you adjust, you continue, and this is how progress becomes sustainable. Not dramatic, not flashy, sustainable. The kind that doesn't require constant motivation. The kind that doesn't collapse when attention shifts. The kind that continues working even when you're not thinking about it. That is real wealth. Not just money in accounts, but a financial life that doesn't demand constant mental energy. A system that works quietly in the background. A relationship with money that feels neutral instead of tense. A sense of stability that doesn't depend on perfect conditions. This audiobook was never meant to give you a formula. Formulas change. Markets change. Circumstances change. What doesn't change are the underlying laws. Money responds to understanding. It flows through coherence. It compounds with time. It resists force. It avoids chaos. Once you see this, you don't need to memorize strategies. You simply stop violating these principles, and that alone creates progress. The final shift happens when you realize that money is no longer the central focus. It becomes a byproduct, a signal that systems are aligned, that decisions are coherent, that time is being respected. When money becomes a byproduct, anxiety dissolves. You're no longer measuring life in dollars earned or lost. You're measuring it in stability, freedom of attention, and optionality. This is the quiet freedom most people seek without knowing its name. Not the freedom to spend endlessly, but the freedom to think clearly, to choose deliberately, to act without urgency, to let time and structure do what force never could. If there is one thing to take from this journey, it is this. You don't make money work for you by commanding it. You make money work for you by understanding the conditions it requires to move. Once that understanding becomes part of how you see the world, money has no choice but to respond. Not because you ask it to, not because you deserve it, but because you are finally working with reality instead of against it. And that is the kind of understanding that doesn't fade. It becomes a way of living, quiet, grounded, inevitable.